So, if you're in the hotel or restaurant industry, the sight of people is going to be pleasing to you. And the more the people, the better, because that means that your business is doing well. But in times of coronavirus, that is the one thing that shouldn't be happening. Swarms of people, crowds of people anywhere, and especially in hotels and restaurants. Naturally, they have been tremendously hit in this period. And my colleague Tushar Gupta has actually been speaking to them and trying to find out what exactly the situation is. So I'm going to turn to him and ask him about what's going on. Tushar.
Hey Karan. Karan, it's been a troubling time for the hotel industry, for the restaurants, for the hotels. They were the first ones to be closed down on March 18th, March 20th when the lockdown came into place. And they will probably be the last ones to open, even though most of them have started taking in delivery orders. But a lot of them, which are heavily dependent on the dine-out revenues, they are still not in operation. And it's been what? It's been almost 2.5 months now. And all of them have been out of cash flow. And this has been a big problem for the entire industry. The second thing with the hotels, they have lost two peak holiday seasons of the year. One is the March and April months when school exams get over and people look for a short holiday around Holi. The second is the May and June, the summer break, the essential summer break. In North India, that's a big holiday season because people tend to go to Himachal and it's a huge business revenue generation season. All of that is gone for this year. So the hotel industry, the restaurants, they're staring at huge losses because of this.
Tushar, for a large part of the lockdown, pretty much all hotels, restaurants were shut. So one can imagine the kind of difficulty the owners would have faced because there's absolutely no business happening. They have people on their payrolls who they would have to pay out salary to. But now as the lockdown is slowly easing, we are moving to a model where, say, takeouts is okay. So people can actually, or say, opt for online delivery of food. How much of that can the restaurant survive on, or how much of that is a relief for them?
Karan, I'll answer this in two parts. First, I'll go for the operational cost because that's what's been troubling most owners. I was speaking to a lot of them actually. So, a rent takes almost 1/5 of the operational cost anywhere. So, if you're sitting, let's say, in a Connaught Place in Delhi, your rent would obviously be higher against if you're sitting in a city like Chandigarh. But everyone, according to where they're sitting in terms of the market they are in, let's say, the rent takes a huge chunk of the operational cost, and there were no waivers on rent. Though some hotel owners I was speaking to, some eatery owners I was speaking to, they managed to renegotiate the rents, but the majority owners have not been able to do so. Now, that is one problem. The second problem is for the month of March and April, the labor had to be paid, the staff had to be paid because there was still no clarity on how long the lockdown will. It was only after April 14th when the migrant crisis began and people started going back to their villages, so that some hotel owners had chosen not to pay the salaries. But for a large part of the months of March and April, the salaries had to be paid. So that was another challenge. Now, all of this was happening without any revenue, Karan. Please understand, we often tend to look at some industries in a very biased manner as not a small or a medium enterprise, thinking that they do not need cash flow. But as it is with airlines, as we discussed the other day, cash flow is also integral to this industry. And on this industry depends the cash flow of many other industries, such as logistics, such as your warehouses, supply chains, all those people supplying raw materials for the restaurants and eateries and hotels. So a lot of them were hit by the revenues. The operational costs stayed where they are, barring the month of later half of April and May when the salaries were not to be paid really, the operational cost really hit a lot of people. Now, the second thing was, as the lockdown was relaxed earlier this month in May, a lot of restaurants were allowed to carry out their deliveries, especially in the orange and the green zones. Now, I spoke to a lot of people, especially about this. So here's one example. I spoke to some hotelier in Bombay. He tells me that out of the 80 lakh rupees he made last year in the same month, that is in April 2019, only 15 to 20 lakhs actually came from delivery. Rest actually came from the dine out revenues. So people, as depending on the markets, they actually choose to dine out. That's where their major revenues come from. Now, why this happens? Because every time a restaurant delivers its order through Zomato or Swiggy, they have to part with a percentage commission, which is given to the aggregator, the digital landlords, as most hotel owners like to call them. So that is why delivery revenues are not enough. Of course, it does come across as some bit of a cash flow in times like these, but it's more like a band-aid over a bruise that's been caused by a sword, Karan.
Right. Tushar, you touched upon a couple of points, and let me go over each one of them. First, you spoke about online delivery revenue not being a substantial part of their overall revenue. But they are also having problems with them, isn't it, in terms of their tie-up and partnership with them as to, arbitrary discounts and stuff like that, isn't it?
Yes, Karan. See, Karan, before the era of Zomato and Swiggy, discounts were a privilege. They were not a routine. But today, anyone who places an order on either of these aggregators, they're expecting a discount. Now, what one of the major problems hotel owners, restaurant owners have with these aggregators is that they do not get to decide these discounts. Something that should be between the buyer and the seller, that is the restaurant and the consumers, is that decision is being taken by the aggregator. So this is where the problem is. Second, some programs which are started by Zomato and Swiggy, people tell me that by the time they can stabilize revenue from one of these programs, one of these schemes carried out by any of the aggregators, the scheme changes. So there's no tangible revenue, there's no tangible data to look at. The third problem is the ownership of data, Karan. Now, if you own a restaurant and I'm your consumer, the data should essentially belong to you if I'm ordering from you. But in this case, what happens? The data actually goes to the aggregators, and that is why they're known as digital landlords. So what they do with this data, they create non-personalized data sets, share them with competitor restaurants, which gives out a lot of personal data about the number of orders, about the kind of orders, about what's working, what's not working. Then some aggregators go a step ahead and launch their own kitchens, which are essentially just restaurants catering to delivery orders. So that also dents the revenue. So the ownership of data has become a very, very big problem with the restaurants in India because they have no direct ownership of the consumers, and that's what they want to take back control of. For Zomato and Swiggy, the challenge is new. They can no longer rely on heavy discounts as they were earlier. The orders are going to go down given people would like to take a number of precautions after the virus outbreak. So both the restaurants and the aggregators will have less leverage to further make deliberations on how they want to go together. Of course, for their own survival, both of them will have to work together, but that leverage, that economic leverage between both of them, that would be far less now. So that's going to be very challenging going forward.
Right, and we also talk about favorable advantage to these platforms because they can set up their own kitchens, like you mentioned, and that's a factor that, say, someone like Amazon is being called out for now, for sticking their label on products and selling it themselves. The other factor that I was talking about is the challenges with labor, because the hotel and restaurant industry is, of course, such an opportunity for people to come to different cities and towns, and depending on the market and the industry, actually get work. But that's been hit because a lot of people who might be living in fear and insecurity, wanting to go back home, not getting their payments. So, with respect to labor challenges, what are you seeing?
Say, I was speaking to one of the leading hoteliers in India. He tells me in the formal sector alone, the formal dine-in restaurants, there's 7 million people employed. At the informal sector, there are the number goes to around 20 million. Now go for the number, the people who supply the raw materials to all these restaurants and hotels, the number actually touches 30-40 million. And now if you go for the street vendors, which are very critical to a city like Bangalore, Pune, Mumbai, because you often see a lot of people going to these people, the vendors who on the streets sell food and everything. So the loss is very difficult to quantify at this point, Karan, because we still don't have any proper data. The data we have is of the formal sector. Correct. So there's very difficult to how to quantify that loss. Now going forward, now coming back to the labor point, the challenges will be two. One, the deficit of labor. Now a lot of people have gone back to their villages with no definite timeline of when they will choose to return. So the restaurant owners actually don't know when their labor will return. And a lot of them specialize in a certain type of cuisine. So I was talking to this one restaurant owner in my city alone. He tells me now the challenge for him is that the guy who used to prepare the best chicken cuisine, which his restaurant was actually known for, has gone to his village in Bihar and he has no idea when he's going to come back. So that way the business takes a hit, the planning takes a hit. The second thing is, even if the labor comes back, the challenge would be to address the trust deficit between the consumers and the restaurants. Earlier, when we used to go to a restaurant, we were not worried about the hygiene as much as we'll be worried now. Of course, cleanliness was a factor while choosing a restaurant, but it wasn't as important as it will be now. So, open kitchens, looking at how the labor is trained, the staff is trained, those things will become very, very important now. So, these are the two labor challenges I see in the future.
Right. Finally, Tushar, you spoke about what a huge employment bucket this industry is, hotel and restaurants. Given that kind of size, do you think that they have been offered enough of a relief during this time?
See, already Zomato, given it has started some layoffs, and even Swiggy, so they had some media reports, and even I spoke to the president of the National Restaurant Association of India. They tell me 20% of the restaurants might actually not open again, especially the ones who might not have venues to manage their operational costs and the cash flow. Because understand, Karan, it's not like if we open on June 1, there'll be the occupancy as it was before the COVID virus hit us. The occupancy will go down. It will take at least a couple of quarters before restaurants can go back to their sales. Now, in this scenario, a relief package was something that they were looking forward to with keen interest. They have been disappointed. One major factor is, of course, a lot of these restaurants are registered as medium, small, and micro enterprises, but there's no clarity, even with the banks. The banks they usually deal with, that how these loans can be availed. Are these loans for people who already have some credit line with the banks? Are these loans applicable to people who may want to take a loan now when they were not under any loan earlier? So there's no clarity, not even with the bankers. I've been speaking to a lot of bankers on the MSME issue. So it's not that simple as it looks. Of course, the government must be credited for its intent, but on the ground, the situation is not really that simple. Now, a group of people representing the restaurant interest in India, they met the finance minister recently. They've requested for some waivers, some option to avail the input tax credit on their GST. Things like that have been requested. But what this sector really required was immediate liquidity in some form. Even if that could have come in the form of MSME loans with greater clarity, that would have helped. But right now, a lot of these restaurants are also not interested in taking these loans because they're not unsure of the demand in the future. A lot of them are staring at actually complete shutdown. And Zomato, Swiggy, all of them who actually have the data of the restaurants, ironically, they have been stating the same thing. So it's going to be a very shaky recovery. The second thing is the hotels. Hotels under brands like Oyo, they are going to be out of business because the occupancy has gone down. People are not traveling anymore as they used to. People are going to evaluate their traveling decisions more and more going forward in the future until we have a vaccine. And we don't really know when we'll have a vaccine. So that's going to be a problem. The good thing is, hotels and restaurants that rely on domestic tourism, they will be in a position to recover fast than those which rely on international travelers. So even then, it's not like the domestic relying hotels and restaurants will recover faster, but they'll at least recover faster from the one like the ones in Goa, which may have relied a lot on international travelers during the holiday season. It's going to be a very tough time in this financial year for the restaurants and hotels, and we can really hope all of them or most of them can survive the storm. Otherwise, it's very difficult.
Right. Thanks, Tushar, for that super comprehensive overview of the situation in the hotel and the restaurants industry.
Thanks, Karan.